Hey, patrons, welcome back. This is Adi from Gate 7 International, and I'm here with another very special guest. This one, probably the most special we've had in a very long time. I have Despina Panagoulias here, the daughter of Alketas Panagoulias, the most famous Greek national team coach. The only one that comes close would be Otto Rahayo in the same sentence. And he has achieved so much for Greek football. Three Challenge Cup titles with the New York Greek Americans. He's a United States Soccer Federation Hall of Famer, the first to qualify for the Euro Cup in 1980, first Greek qualification for the World Cup in 1994, and he also won three titles at Olympiacos as well. He has accolades as a player as well, back when he played for Aris. Absolute legend, and we are really honored to have Despina here to talk to us about her life and also a little bit about her father as well. Despina, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, Adi. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to talk to you. And I was joking. I told you before we started recording that I can't believe in the time that you and I have now known each other doing things with Olympiacos DC that I didn't think to ask you earlier to do this. So it just feels like this could have happened so much earlier. Definitely missed out. But give us some insight. We always start with all of our guests, a little bit of insight in how you grew up around the sport of football. Now, obviously, for you, it was a little bit different than a lot of our other guests. You grew up with a legend in the house. So give us a little bit of you growing up with football, growing up Panagoulias as the segment's called.
So, honestly, it's something that I realized when I got older. But I had a very crazy childhood. And it started,
Undoubtedly.
I never really r- realized it because my dad was a soccer coach, those three Cups you mentioned with the Greek Americans in New York. I was a baby when all that was happening. So I grew up with my father as a soccer coach my whole life. So there was never a point where soccer wasn't part of my life. Um, and I can start a little bit with that. My dad ended up in New York from Thessaloniki. He was an Aris player and he was enamored. He was such a Hollywood fan. He was enamored with old Hollywood and westerns and John Wayne and Errol Flynn and all those classic actors. And he always had this dream of going to America. So he actually got a soccer scholarship. He applied for a soccer scholarship and came to study in New York. And I think around that time he actually met Teddy, my niece too, in New York.
From
Like they've
the
known each
Olympiacos
other
fan
that
club.
long.
That's
And
incredible.
he he did a bunch of odd jobs, worked in the cafeteria in college and played soccer, right? Going to school. And he also played for the Greek Americans. And then I'm not sure when, but an opportunity came for him to coach and he took it. And he was very successful in that. And a funny story for you is when he, about a year after he was in New York, he went to like a Macedonian dance in New York City and they introduced him to this woman from Thessaloniki. And he was enamored and he was like, I'm a soccer player with Aris. You might have heard of me. And her response was Willem Pauk. And that was my mom. She totally snubbed him, won her over, got married, had me, had my brother. And then one day when I was 3.5, he's like, we're moving to Athens. I am now the Greek national soccer coach. And that's been my life. And by that time, by the time I was 3.5, I remember things, right? What it was like at home. Um, and when I was a little kid, everybody at school would be like, my dad's a lawyer and my dad's a doctor and my dad works here and my dad works at this office. And I'd be like, my dad's a coach. And everybody would be like, what? Because little kids couldn't really. understand. And if you want me to keep going with history, when my dad took over the Greek national team, at the time, Greek soccer was not professional. It was not a professional sport.
Oh, it
Greek
was it
soccer
was still
became
the
prof.
Alpha Ethniki that
I don't know what they called it, but players weren't paid. Like it wasn't their job, right?
thing.
Like they all had to have other jobs. And even my dad, um, when he was coaching the national team, it wasn't like anywhere near the salaries you hear about today, right? He
Oh, of
coached
course.
because he loved the sport. Greek soccer didn't become professional till 1979. So the first few years were tough when we moved, especially for my mom, right? Because my mom had grown up in New York, didn't know anybody in Athens, two little kids at home. Um, so he really built that national team from the ground up,
Really? Yeah.
um, which, culminated, as you mentioned, to the Euro 1980. And around that time, I was 12. I think by the time I was 8 or 9, I started realizing that my dad was famous. Um,
When did that like was there a moment where it dawned on you that he
I
was a
don't,
legend in Greek circles at least?
later in my teens, I definitely did. But when I was a little kid, um, especially when we would go to Thessaloniki, because we lived in Athens, but we would go to Thessaloniki for like holidays, like long Easter breaks, Christmas breaks, summers in Halkidiki. Especially when we would go to Thessaloniki, I was as a little kid, I always thought it was interesting that my dad knew everyone. And it wasn't that my dad knew everyone, it's everyone knew him. So we'd be at dinner and people would come up and talk and all that. So when I was like 7, 8, 9, I just thought my dad knew everybody. The fame didn't really start hitting me hard. And the one thing I remember was when I was in seventh grade, I went to an American school. It was an all girls school, private school, very strict school. Um, and it was a Monday morning and we had a math exam. And I'm really bad at math to this day. And I was petrified about this math test. And our professor was this very strict teacher, very by the book, never cracked jokes. And we had a math exam first thing in the morning, the night before the Greek national team had played in Denmark.
Ooh.
And it was a turning point game for the Greek national team. The name of Greece pretty much exploded after that. They had a very awesome performance playing against the Denmark that I think had like 6 Ajax players on the squad or something like that. And it was broadcast live and it was like 9 p.m. Greek time. So the game wasn't over till 11. Me, my mom, and my brother watched it on TV. We weren't in Denmark. But people like were out celebrating and partying and stuff in the streets. So the next morning, here I am at school, and the teacher comes in and he's walking up and down the rows and he's like not saying anything. And he stops and he says, "I want you to thank your classmate because there won't be an exam today." Because I was
Oh
up
my goodness.
late all night celebrating, whatever. And I was like, and everybody in class was like, yeah. And I was like, oh my God, really? Because of that? So that was like the first time that I realized that, oh wow, this is going to have an impact on my life.
That is a crazy story. That's fantastic. I love it.
And then it just after that it just kept getting bigger. In 1981, a year after that, is when he went to Olympiacos.
Hmm.
Um,
For the first time.
yes. Uh, and that got more intense. Everything about our life became more intense. Um, and by that, I mean, so when you coach the national team, I mean, think about it. The national team plays once every 2 months,
Right.
or if it's qualifiers, they might play like 2, 3 games in a row, and then there's a break. And um, but Olympiacos or any league team is every week or twice
Right.
a week, right? So think about it like as a family, the dad is away maybe once a month or once every 2 months, and then all of a sudden dad's away every weekend.
Right.
So it was very, very different. So it was intense in terms of family scheduling stuff. It was intense because we lived in Athens. So everybody around me was an Olympiacos fan. My bus driver, the guy at the supermarket, like everywhere I went, any errand my parents sent me to, like people would be like, "How's your dad? Tell your dad hi. Does your dad have any tickets for the game?" People always ask me for tickets. I'd be 13 years old and I'd be like, "I don't know if he has tickets." Um, but a funny thing about Olympiacos, right? Like, so growing up as a little kid, uh, my dad never, ever, ever showed preference to a player or a team. He was, on that standpoint, an outmost professional, right? His heart belonged to Aris because he started playing for Aris when he was 15. That's where he like grew up and became
Of
what he
course.
called this. That's where I became a man, kind of thing, right? Um, but it wasn't ever like, oh, I'm gonna go see the Aris game or I'm gonna listen to Aris on the radio, kind of thing. It's one of those like, it's in my heart, but I'm not like
Right. Because you
no
grew
preference,
up there,
you know.
hometown, that kind of thing.
So because of that, my little brother got influenced by that, and he was a Aris supporter. And my mom, as we said, she was a PAOK supporter, not active, but that was her preference. And I was an Olympiacos fan since a little kid, since a teeny tiny little kid. Um, and everybody would always be like, "Why? How did you turn out to be Olympiacos?" And I'd be like, "I don't know. That's my favorite team." And I had the scarves and everything. And when my dad came home one day around the dinner table, and he's like, your mom and I have an announcement. I'm leaving the national team and I'm going to be the coach at Olympiacos. I was like, what? I was so excited. I was beyond
That's
myself.
amazing.
So, yeah, so he coached Olympiacos for 2 years. And then in 1983, and I honestly don't know how it came about. Um, when he got the job to coach the US team. I do know that he had spoken to Mr. Daifas, who was the president of Olympiacos at the time. They had a very good relationship. And he asked for permission to come to the States to interview for the job.
Oh, wow.
And, this is a time before Skype and cell phones and internet. A phone call from the United States to Greece was expensive, right?
Very,
It
yeah.
wasn't something you did on a whim kind of thing. And also, like, you couldn't really make that call. Like, you couldn't go to a payphone and call Greece, right? So, my dad had the interview, and I think he got the offer, and he called my mom and told my mom, and my mom had to call Mr. Daifa. My dad was on the way back, flying back, right? And My mom to this day says that he said, because he had to release him, right?
Right, because he was under contract still.
So my mom to this day says he said, it would be our honor and Olympiacos' honor if Alketas was the head coach of the U.S. national team. Of course, you can go, kind of thing. And
That's really weird to think about because I'm trying to think if how that conversation would go like these days. And I think it's really hard for I think it would be a lot harder because you don't see as many owners letting, you know what I mean? Especially if a coach is doing well, you don't want to see them leave. Although, but it's happened. So, but still, that's I didn't
yeah, I
expect that
mean,
at all.
I think it had to do with their relationship. You know what
Right.
I mean? Um, because when you think about it, my dad was kind of an outsider. Like
Right.
he wasn't um in Greek we say Yeni Mathrema Olympiakos, he didn't like grow up as a fan. He wasn't part of the group. He didn't really have any connections in the club. I mean, as the national coach, I'm sure he had met people, but he wasn't like an insider. But he became an insider. They welcomed
Right.
him with open arms. They treated him very well. Um, and case in point, when his job in the US was no more because the American League folded,
Right.
they took him back. So he went back in 1986, I think. Uh, and at that time, he went back to Greece alone because the timing had worked out that I had graduated high school and I was on my first year of college. And why would you leave the United States college age to go back to Greece? I wanted to finish school.
Right.
And my brother was, I think, a sophomore or a junior in high school. So my parents decided that the kids would stay, and my mom did the back and forth from that day on.
Now, just to clarify, at this moment, when after coaching the national team, he was actually part of that Team America project that was in
Mm-hmm,
DC, correct? So, were you guys
mm-hmm,
living in
mm-hmm.
DC at the time, or in
Yes.
the area?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
in Virginia,
Yep.
Northern Virginia.
Yep.
So, just to
Um,
clarify, and you know
yeah.
what? Actually, so while we're kind of on the topic about him coaching in the United States. I kind of want to rewind the clock a little bit, and I want to talk about that early success that he had while he was at the with the Greek American team,
Mm-hmm.
the New York Greek Americans,
Mm-hmm.
because you gave us a little bit of insight how he got the opportunity to coach. He had amazing success, winning the Challenge Cup 3 times. Now, it was my understanding that at the time, the New York Greek Americans were like a semi-pro team, right? It was
Yes.
a group of guys that were very good players that together, but technically they were semi-pro. And this
Yes.
Challenge Cup featured teams that were more on a professional level, and then he was still able to win that. Um,
Yeah. But
can you kind of explain a little bit more of that? Because we have a lot of younger listeners that have no idea what we're talking about.
so you know what? I can explain as much as I know. By the way, my dad wrote a book. Um, it's in Greek, so a lot of listeners probably wouldn't be able to read through it. He wrote a book, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, and he goes into detail into some of that stuff. And I've read the book 10 times over or more. And I don't remember exactly the details of the Greek Americans. And also, when that was happening, I was literally
Right, you
like
were
not born and 1 years old and 2 years old.
right,
So
exactly.
I don't have firsthand knowledge. But Greek Americans was and still is, they still exist, a New York based club. And what they did was they actually brought Greek players over. A lot of Greek players um, have done a stint at Greek Americans back in the 60s and the 70s. And I know there are some big names, but I honestly can't remember who now. Um, and it was people who were, back then people didn't have the opportunity to travel as
Right.
much as they do now, right? So it's like, oh my gosh, I get to go to America and check it out. And some of them ended up staying and living here. Mr. Manice might know more about that than I do. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't have that much detail besides knowing that some people on my dad's squad were professional Greek players that had either like stopped playing in Greece or took some time off to come here and play. So it wasn't just completely um, non-experienced players on that team playing against like bigger clubs kind of stuff.
Oh, right. But I know for the like for the sake of the conversation, when you if you when you speak to like we'll say Americans that look at like the history of US soccer, they look at New York Greek Americans and they're like, "Oh my god, this club, it was a club that most people wouldn't have expected to be winning it 3 times." Let's put it
Hmm.
that way. Because they
And they
didn't
did
know
it
who
three
they were
times
playing.
in a row. Yeah.
Right. In absolute insanity for the time, for especially for people who didn't know who was playing on the team, who didn't know who these people were. So very incredible, incredible for him to achieve that.
Yeah. And this is my interpretation and disclosure. I'm his daughter, so rose-colored glasses, right? Um, but if my dad had a talent or a strength or a thing, some people call it the star, or the Alketas star, whatever, was he had this unique ability to inspire people. Um, like very general in the battlefield kind of thing. He wasn't like the most technical coach, but he was the
He was a motivator.
work you up and send you
Yeah.
out there kind of thing. So I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. Here we are, a bunch of Greek guys. Let's go out there and show them kind of with the Greek Americans.
So moving to the national team now, when he's coaching the U.S. national team,
Hmm.
uh, did he ever explain to you kind of or ever have any discussions about the difference between managing US soccer versus managing Greek football or Greek soccer? Did he ever discuss that with you? The difference between dealing with the two, because he had plenty of experience. The Team America project, the national team. He coached the national team in Greece. At that time, he had coached Olympiacos too. Uh, did he ever give you any insights, or did you have any experiences that showed the stark difference between the two cultures?
Both. He talked about it. So, what's interesting is that his career in Greece, it's not that he didn't talk about it, but it was kind of understood among the family. Like we all watched the press and we all watched the performance of the team and we heard rumors and negative comments and positive comments and stuff. And we would talk about it sometimes, but not that much because it was part of we were very immersed in it. The American experience, we talked a lot about it as a family. Maybe because it was just the four of us here. Um, Lots of things. He was very frustrated. Um, I know it's going to be hard for some of your listeners to believe this, but back then, no one cared about soccer and no one cared about the national team. So he came here with this aspiration of he's going to, you know, and it was hard for him to get players. No one wanted to play for the national team. Uh, it was hard for clubs to let people come play. For example, the biggest club at the time was New York Cosmos, right? and they had this guy, Ricky Davis. Uh, and my dad wanted Ricky on the national team. Makes sense, right? At the time, he was
Right.
the best American player, and Cosmos wouldn't let him go. So he would get frustrated about that. Um, he got frustrated at the whole business model of sports in the United States. Um, it's gotten it's crazy to me how much soccer has changed in the United States, and a lot of that has to do with the 94 World Cup when everybody got exposed to the game. And um but the fact that you can watch soccer games on TV now and no one's like, wait, where's my commercial break? You know, that was one of the biggest problems that he was encountering, that no one wanted to sponsor the federation or US soccer because, oh, there's no commercial breaks in soccer, like, you know, so they
Right.
weren't getting any sponsors. um they were staying, if you can believe this, the national team would, like, say, travel to New York to play a game, and they were staying like at Motel Sixes on the side of the Jersey Turnpike because there was no money, right?
Right.
um so it used to really frustrate him that America had some super duper great athletes, right?
Right.
Because from the standpoint of physical performance at the high school, college level, the US is way ahead than anybody else, right? Um, the infrastructure we have for sports. And um, he would go to colleges to recruit people, and kids would go, oh, Mr. Panagoulias, I'd love to, but baseball's given me X money, so I'm going to go
Right.
do that instead of soccer. So it was an uphill battle. Um, he had a great deal of um, belief in U.S. soccer. I mean, I remember there was an interview he gave at the New York Times where he called U.S. soccer the sleeping giant kind of thing. Um,
I read that
and
interview.
he was very bummed that, just because from like money, circumstances, whatever, things didn't work out. And the way they did it at the time, like, Team America was actually the national team.
Right. And what and
And
if I'm not mistaken, right, wasn't that supposed to also like it was supposed to be the national team kind of build the team together, but also be something to give because it was the North American Soccer League, if was what it was called. And at that time there were struggles with insolvency and they were looking for a team to kind of bring at least like some type of united zeal towards the sport. Like, hey, look, our national team's also going to play against these club teams. That was kind of the idea behind it, right?
yeah, they did it. I think they made, essentially, they took the national team and made it be part of the league. So they would
Right.
play every week, A, to get the team to bond, uh, and B, to give the sport exposure. Um, Funny story for you. And I mean, my brother and I suffered severe culture shock because of that, by the way, like the whole the approach to soccer in the
Oh, yeah.
US back then. Um, and the culture shock was not like a US versus Greece culture thing, because we were American kids, and our grandparents still lived here when we were growing up in Greece. So we had spent a lot of time in the US. We were very accustomed to that. It was the soccer thing that um, they based the national team, Team America, in DC to kind of do like the nation's capital, our national
Right.
team kind of thing, right? And the home stadium was RFK. And the team offices were smack in the middle of DC, 2 blocks from the White House on Farragut Square. So one
Wow.
day, to drum up interest, they took the team out, and the team is in uniforms and stuff, and they're kicking the ball and heading the ball out in the park lunchtime. And people, and my brother and I went too, and we're like, and people are coming up and they're like, "Oh, is this the new hockey team?" And we were like, "What?" What?
Oh god.
Like, people were clueless, really. And like, in high school, one of my first days, my first week here, I wore a soccer t-shirt, like I love soccer or something silly like that. And I got cornered in the hallways by the football team, if you can believe that. And they were like, "I don't like your shirt," kind of thing. And I was like,
My
what?
gosh.
So it was very interesting from that perspective. And my brother and I would go to RFK games, and there would be, I don't know, 2,000 people there, like in this huge stadium, right? And we had
Right.
these RFK passes, and we could go anywhere in the stadium. We had full access to the stadium. And we would just like walk around and go all the way to the top and all the way in underneath the stadium. And it was like, that was kind of a fun experience. But it was always such a bummer because we'd get excited to go to the game, and we get there and there'd be like no one there.
Oh wow. And
They
so
couldn't
in the
they couldn't get
it wasn't like more popular in the beginning and then died down. It was just kind of always
I guess it depended on what team they played too. So here's an interesting fact, because my dad, especially coaching the Greek national team, had a lot of international connections,
right.
right? So he got Juventus to come here and play
Wow.
friendly at RFK Stadium, um, with Team America. And I think it was either a 1-1 or a 0-0 tie. And Team America was like, "This is awesome." Juventus was so bummed.
That's
But
crazy.
that was the Juventus that had, I don't know, like, I don't know if you know these names, like Paolo Rossi and Platini was in it, Michel Platini.
Back when he was playing.
Um,
It was a little bit before my time, but I know of the team
Michel Platini was also like the president of UEFA a few
at
years
one point,
back.
yeah.
He was a French national. But I don't know. It was a difficult, strange time, but um, I think what also amplified the difficulties of American soccer is my dad was constantly on the road, and I don't mean with the team. He had to scout players at
Oh, right.
colleges.
It's not
He,
like you could watch tape easily like now, right? You had to go see them.
I
Jeez.
mean, think about it, like scouting players in Greece, okay, and scouting players all over colleges in the United States.
Yeah,
I
that
mean,
oh my
he would
goodness.
come home exhausted and be like, "I took two connecting flights and a bus and a train and a car." I mean, he would like jokingly say that. But think about it, like some teeny tiny school, I don't know, in North Dakota or something. Like,
Right.
he had to go all over the place, and the distances were too great. That
That's
that was
that's
difficult.
crazy. Now, let me ask because um you talked about the difference in cultures and the things that he had to do. Now, he managed teams and situations that have a lot of what we can say like chaos, right? And mayhem around them. Olympiacos is never an easy club to coach, right? There's always in Greece especially, there's madness everywhere. And then when he was coaching at the time in the United States, just the chaos around the lack of knowledge about the sport in the United States and the lack of funding. Uh, how did he manage the chaos in the United States and the players through that versus managing in Greece with, as we know, the We could say the extracurriculars that go on around there with the culture that it is around sports there. Did he manage things kind of the same? Was he just trying to motivate everybody through it because he's a great motivator, or did he have to handle it differently between here and Greece?
To be honest, from what I saw, he was the same. Um, when it came to the players and coaching the team, he had this outlook like his players were like his children. It was a very familial, I'm here for you, I'm your mentor. If something's bugging you, come tell me, kind of thing. There was a lot of psychology before there was sports psychology
Right.
happening. So with his players, I think he was the same. Um, when you're a kid, like you watch your parents go to work and you're like, oh, whatever. And then only when you're an adult, you realize sometimes I think about the amount of stress my dad must have been through. Like
Right.
we talk about stress, and I can't even imagine what the poor man went through. And that's another difference with the US and Greece. Um, it was so refreshing that Team America would play a game at RFK, and let's say they lost. I don't know. And he could come home and we could go out to dinner and have dinner, and no one knew who we were or what happened or nothing. If he had a game in Greece and Olympiacos lost, like I didn't want to leave the house, kind of
Yeah,
thing.
I can only
Not like
imagine.
I'm not talking violence or anything like that. I just didn't want to hear people picking on me.
Right.
Or like, I'm sure he had to deal with like, hey, why'd you put that guy in and not that guy? Oh, better like next time, or. So I think there were times that he was very stressed. And you're also talking about a time where people didn't openly talk about stress as easily. Like, I don't think my dad would have ever said, "Oh my God, I'm so stressed." Um, I think the stress in the US was different. Like, it was stress of running the business, to where Greece, the stress was
Winning.
survival mode kind of
Yeah,
thing, right?
exactly.
It felt like going to war every Sunday or every month or whatever. Um,
Absolutely. Um, that insight is incredible. To get that inside info about what he was going through, what you guys are going through, because that's not something that really is ever focused on. You hear a lot about the results, what the tactics, but you never really kind of see like what goes on with the man himself. So that's some great
yeah, and
insight.
that's one thing that people forget, that there's human beings behind
Exactly.
these successes and especially the failures, right? When
Yeah.
something doesn't go right. But I mean, it comes with every public figure, I think, that if something goes wrong, they have to deal with the crisis management of it all.
Of course. Absolutely. Um, you actually touched on kind of like all the follow-up questions for that in the entire discussion. So, I guess the next thing that we can talk about, and this was something that the Patreon members really wanted to talk about, was the 1994 World Cup.
Hmm.
They want to talk about the 94 World Cup and especially the qualification stage and then the finals. They wanted to know about, for him and for you, what was the was there a difference in feeling from the qualifiers and then being in that big stage, being in the World Cup itself? And if you did get like kind of like different feelings and emotions, like when did it kind of dawn on you guys that Greece can qualify for this? Greece is going to do it. And how did that impact everything?
So the 94 World Cup is a sore point for me. Uh, and there was some anger I held on to, and I still hold on to, um, that even my dad didn't have anymore. And he used to tell me that, oh, you shouldn't let that stuff bother you. But he was more seasoned to that kind of chaos than I was, right? Because now you're talking about a time where I'm not 10, I'm not
Right.
15, I was 25, and like a business professional on my own kind of thing.
Right.
Um, and expecting professionalism from others too.
Right.
So I'll get to that. So to back up, um, I think my dad went back, and I might be wrong on the year, though I think I'm pretty right, to take on the national team in 92
Hmm.
to lead them through the qualifiers. Um,
That sounds right from the notes that I had at least.
at the time, I lived in the US. I had a job, and I'm sure everybody can relate. Like, you're starting off your career, you can just like, oh, I'm going to take off and go to Greece or whatever. And back
Right.
then, things were even different, even more different than they are now, right? So, and this is actually even before the internet, right at the start of the internet. So, news didn't come as easily. I couldn't follow the games. I hadn't lived in Greece for like 10 years. I would go back all the time, but I didn't know the players personally in 94 to where before that, like I truly grew up, I always say, with 22 brothers, right?
Right.
Um, we were all like a family, whether the national team or Olympiacos or Aris or whatever. I didn't know the players. Um, and I went to two of the qualifiers. I went to Luxembourg uh, in October of 93, I think. And I had gone to Moscow against Russia in May of 93. And I think at that game in Russia, we started thinking that, oh my God, this is within reach. Um, and, knowing my dad as well, as I did, and knowing the environment, right, that he operated in, you could feel the energy in the air. Like in the team hotel, like you could feel like, oh my God, we're at the doorstep of something really big here.
And they believed like they believed it could happen.
Yeah. Like they started believing it. Um, I would say the World Cup was in the summer of 94, definitely by the summer of 93, if not the fall, like they really thought it was within reach. um and then they beat Russia in Athens after that. um and I think if it's still up there, there's YouTube video of that victory of Greece over Russia, where, and I think it was up on Athinaikosa Stadium. I wasn't there, I was here. Where truly the whole stadium goes up in flares when they scored. That you see my dad coming off the bench and like totally angry at the fans, right? Because the ref is
Yeah.
looking around because you can't see. I mean, there's this cloud of smoke and the game's interrupted forever. And I think my dad was scared the ref was going to call off the game or something, right? Um,
Watching that video, that thought never crossed my mind. I just see the flares, everyone's going
yeah,
nuts. I didn't think
yeah.
about that at all.
Um, so, it's funny. No one's ever asked me that question. And now that I think about it, I was happy they qualified, but it's an odd thing. I wasn't surprised, I think.
Really?
Yeah, because I could feel it. Like I said, you could see it coming, you know? Um, and then everything went to hell after that.
Well, so now I was only like 4 or 5 years old. I was 4 years old. I hadn't turned 5 yet when the World Cup happened in the United States. I was just happy, of course, because it was Greece. Greece was there. Um, the f I always figured that people would look at that and say, "Look, that was the first time Greece qualified. That's the best thing here. Forget about everything else." So if you're comfortable with it, do you mind kind of elaborating on some of what you were talking about before, why you were so why
Most
that angle kind of stuck
definitely.
with you?
Um, I can definitely talk about it. I want you and everyone else to keep in mind that my lens is very narrow. And by that, I mean, I did not live in Greece. I lived here
Mhm.
at a time, again, I want to remind everyone, which is hard to believe now, but there was no internet, right? Uh, you got news from, and phone calls were still super expensive, right? You made a phone
Right.
call to someone in Greece and like you thought, okay, yeah, I'm fine, yeah, see you later, da, da, da," and you hung up, and it was like a $50 phone call just to do that.
Yeah.
Um, so news was trickling very slow. Uh, and you really didn't have much awareness what was happening on the ground, kind of thing. Plus, again, I was 25. I had my own life, my own job, my own
Right.
kind of, you know. um I will tell you that because the World Cup was in the US, the group draw, how the groups are going to be arranged from the teams that qualified, happened in Las Vegas. How appropriate. So the Greek soccer delegation, not the team, um, came to Vegas for the draw. And I had friends in Vegas, like we went as a family trip. Um, we kind of tagged along on the side. And I remember being at the Vegas Convention Center when they do the little group one, whatever, group two. And when they're like Greece, and then they go Argentina, we were like, oh. And then they say Bulgaria, and we're like, oh no. And then Nigeria. I mean, those were really strong teams, right?
Yeah, Bulgaria back in the day was a very strong
Yeah.
team. Argentina has historically been strong as well.
And it was the
Um,
Maradona Argentina, right?
right.
I mean, she was on the squad. So, parentheses, my dad never, ever, ever said those guys are better than us
Right.
to any team that he coached. It was like, I've heard his players say to me, he used to say, they're 11, we're 11. Um, so he never said anything right after the draw. Um, because the event is over because we're not
Right.
sitting with him. And afterwards I was like, oh my God, Dad, Argentina, like, but he didn't comment on that. But I'm pretty sure in his mind, and this is where it's my lens, those are not his words. I'm sure in his mind, he was thinking, oh my God, this is so awesome. We made it at the World Cup, right? Like, I started this team as a young guy, like
Right.
with barely, scraping by financially to build this dream. And look what we've accomplished, kind of thing. And, you know, we got a bad draw and if things don't go well, I mean, we tried our best, kind of thing. We're here and it's a building block. Next time we'll do better and next time we'll do. He
Right.
never said that, but I can see him thinking that, right? I mean, he wasn't delusional. Um, So there was the draw, and then next time I saw my father, um, was in Boston for the Argentina game. And before the game, I drove from DC to Boston
Oh, wow.
to go to the game. Here's one thing you're not going to believe.
So we have a
Imagine,
lot of Patreon members that are not from the United States. How long did that drive take back then in the 90s?
it might have taken me 12 hours because
Wow.
of traffic and all that. And this is one thing that people now won't believe. But back then, imagine me having to explain to my boss that I need time off to go to a soccer game. They were like, what?
Right.
So all I could get was a day off. So I'm not kidding you, I would drive up to Boston, go to the game, uh, crash at a hotel, and then like at 5 in the morning get back up and drive back.
Good
And they
God.
played twice in Boston and once in Chicago. Chicago, I can't remember what day of the week they played, but I was there on a weekend, so that worked out. But yeah, I had to like beg and plead with my boss. Imagine now if you went to your boss and you said, "My dad is in the World Cup."
Yeah,
It would
now they'd
be
be like, "Oh,
totally
yeah."
different. They'd be like, "What?" Back then they were like, "What is that? And why do you have to go?"
That's
Um,
insane.
so there's a lot of speculation and he said about what happened at the World Cup. But my interpretation and what I think, and again, this is not what I heard from my father. Um, I think it was a period in Greece that was it was a strange culmination of political situations, and I'll explain. And also, Greek soccer had started its baby steps to getting elevated, meaning um, its first couple of players that got to play outside of Greece and become stars or become more well known or Greek. There was always personalities in Greek soccer, but there was never like the star, like as we think of like the Ronaldos and the Messis now, that
Right.
didn't have that yet in Greece, and they were starting to develop around those times. So my
Even
dad's
even when
approach.
Panathinaikos went to, like, the European Cup final, there wasn't
So
like
they were
that?
stars like the Tomazos, right?
Right.
Um, but it was a different kind of star. I don't know how to explain it. It was, and first of all, when Panathinaikos went there, reminder, Greek soccer
Yeah.
wasn't professional. They weren't
That's
getting
right, that's
paid,
right. Yeah,
right?
different it was a different
So it
animal
was
then, yeah.
like a star, like almost like a star of a high school team. Do you know what I'm saying? It's
So,
like,
like, a local hero, but nobody cared outside of
yes.
the
And
yeah.
not, no, I mean, not that, more like a down to earth hero kind of thing.
I see what you mean.
It
I got it.
wasn't
I
like
see what you
a,
mean.
I don't want to call anybody like a diva or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying, but it's like the players themselves started becoming more professional. Like, wait, how about he gets that sponsor and I don't get that sponsor? And how come he got more airtime and I didn't get airtime? And oh, I don't want a flying coach. I want a flying first class kind of thing. That kind of
Maybe the
start.
commercialization of the stars didn't happen yet, if that's what
Yeah, it started happening around the same time, right?
got it.
And when a team qualifies for the World Cup, the federation gets a lot of money,
Right.
right? So all of a sudden, poor little Greece gets this influx of like, oh my God, we are getting calls for sponsors and calls for events, and FIFA has given us money to do this, and we have to, oh my God, we have money to go like actually like stay at a nice hotel and, like those kinds of things. So it was a culmination of a lot of things, right? One was all of a sudden you have the money issue in terms of sponsorships. Um, so to some is to some it seemed like, oh, the sport isn't pure anymore. This is all about the money. Um, to some it was, why do I have to do these events? Because we have sponsors. Well, what are sponsors? Like that was like kind of a new thing for them, right? So they didn't understand why they had to go shake hands with people, kind of thing.
You mean like the
Um,
players or everybody in
yeah,
the organization?
yeah, yeah, the players. And also like my dad himself didn't change his approach with the players. And I think he was kind of taken aback by the fact that some of his players kind of talked back. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, because he
Not
had,
talk.
back then, he had some personalities that it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, and I think there weren't any hard feelings, right, on his part.
Right.
Um, but I think he was kind of, my dad was very much old school, like my way or
Mhm.
the highway.
Yeah.
So if someone said, "No, I don't want to do that," or "I don't want to sit here," he was like, he would get angry and be like, "Well, get out," kind of thing. So it started causing problems within the team. And remember, this is the one team that I didn't know personally. I didn't know any of those guys.
So, from just to, clarify, because we did have a question from one of our patrons about this. How many of the players at the final were different, I should say, or maybe not as, like, regular? It was it the same exact group of players overall from the qualifiers that were
Pretty
in the World Cup
much.
final?
So that's one, what people have called my one of my dad's mistakes, which again, I don't know. And I'm not saying that to like excuse myself or him, but I don't know because I lived here, so I wasn't following the players and who was the
Got it,
talent and
okay.
who was better and stuff. But a lot of people criticized my dad at the time for his selection of the final squad
Oh, yeah,
because
but
he
that's
took a
every
lot
Greek
of,
coach. Everyone criticizes
oh
every
yeah, I
Greek
know,
coach.
but I think what people said about
Yeah,
it makes sense. The criticism makes sense.
mhm,
But I also see his standpoint. um, the criticism he got was he picked some players that were on the older side
yeah,
and left out of the squad really good young talent. And his explanation was these guys έδωσαν το αίμα και
right,
τον υδρότα για τη φανέλα, right?
right.
For a decade or more and qualified us. So I think they should see the results of their whatever.
Right.
Um, I had a couple of players, and I don't want to name names, that I met in the past couple of years since my dad's been gone who were left off the squad. And they said to me that your dad called me and said, I wanted to call you and tell you first. No one else knows yet. I haven't given the names anywhere, but I'm not going to bring you. I think you're great. I think you're a great talent, but you're young and you're going to have other opportunities. And there's people that I'm bringing that will never have this opportunity. And they said to me that they appreciated the personal phone call so much because usually coaches don't do that. They just publish the names kind of thing.
Oh,
Right.
no, yeah, some very recent coaches have done the same thing, so that's a very respectful gesture.
Um, so yeah, like maybe he could have picked better players, right? Or not, I don't want to say better players, younger players, different players. I don't know. So that was one criticism he had. Um, and then tensions were running high in the team because my dad had clashed with a couple of players. So like the group got, half were on my dad's side, half were on the players' side. Um, and then there were some political issues, which I don't know if they're true, but I've heard about them from people in the Federation. Not my dad. A lot of people told me stuff after my dad passed. Um, I've heard this political issue common from people in the Federation and from reporters that my dad had run for office um, with Nea Democratia and the government
Local
at the
office
time.
or like a national office?
No, European Parliament
Oh, wow.
with
Well,
Nea
just to
Democratia.
just to give some background, your dad did have an office in Thessaloniki, right?
Yeah, he was a city councilman. He was like the most popular. He got the most votes out of anybody. Um, my dad studied political science, by the way, as
Oh,
did
wow.
I.
I didn't know that.
And he was an extreme history buff. So public service, and to be honest, he looked at the Greek national team as public service. Like, because especially when
Yeah.
he first started, I mean, they were getting paid peanuts, right? It
Right.
wasn't like, um,
Not like now.
so he had run, I think it was in 93 or even maybe 94. No, it was 93 for European Parliament with the New Democracy Party. But the party in power was PASOK at the time.
Right, yes. The
So I heard from people afterwards that there were conversations at PASOK at the time and the high levels like, wait a second, how can we have, because when the Greek team qualified for the World Cup, the exposure was global, right?
Of course.
And within Greece, the exposure was huge and the popularity and stuff. So there was some conversation about how can we have someone who's from the opposite party representing the national team.
Like, as the coach, you mean?
Yeah. So
That
there
wouldn't
was,
surprise me in the slightest, especially given how things have politicized in Greece with sports recently. That wouldn't surprise me in the slightest with EPO then, and especially how they are now. So
and
I
I don't know if it's true, but supposedly there were those conversations. And the press, and I think it might still be this way, I'm not sure, but back then, there was the press that belonged to this party and the press that belonged to that party. So the press from this party would write negative stuff, and the press from this party would write positive stuff. So the story I heard is there's some kind of press conference or something in Boston or New York because the team was training in New York, preparing for the games.
right,
When my dad gets word, and you have to remember the news gets back delayed, right? It's not like my dad gets the morning Greek paper every morning. He
right,
finds out stuff like days later with the little like vague comments and gossip and all that. So story goes that he goes into this press conference and he tells you reporters, you no longer have access to the team, kind of thing. And sometimes I think to myself, man, I wish I knew this stuff so I could be like, Dad, don't do that. That's going to cause the opposite result, kind of thing. So then the battle between the press and the team and my dad got even more amplified because when you're denied like the access to the locker room kind of thing, you get pissed, and you're right.
of course.
war stuff and all that. So I don't know. The team underperformed. Um, the good,
Underperformed. What did I don't like what did people expect? The group they drew.
yeah, I know, I know, but they underperformed, and I think part of it was their wings were clipped. To be honest, you know.
Right.
Um, the one thing my dad told me and told the story pretty broadly. It was their very first game with Argentina, and they're still in the locker room where they line up to go out. And he said he's walking next to his players and he's looking at them, and they're all looking at Maradona like this, you know?
Of course.
And he says that was that moment that I knew we had lost the game.
Right.
And he said, I walked up and down and I was like, come on. Because, like he said, Maradona was like, all like, blah, 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 like
Yeah.
riling up the team and stuff. And he's like, which one of you is going to do that? And they were all silent.
Oh,
And I think it kind of hit them, like, and also things, like I told you, like, they were tired, the US humid heat, the training, the time difference, the being away from home for a while because they were here like a month in advance to get adjusted to the time zone and the heat and all that. So,
and then having to do all these like sponsorship events that they never thought they would have to do took away
yep,
from them
yep,
focusing on the game, and
yep.
so it really just created like that perfect storm
I'm not
for this.
excusing my dad's mistakes because, like I told you, my dad was not really like the technical
Right.
guy. Actually, my brother and I used to fight about that. I would be like, Dad wasn't really like the technical guy. And he'd be like, what are you talking about? And he would get really mad. Um, but I'm just going to close out the World Cup by saying the very last game that Grace had in that group, um, I went to the team hotel. I drove again from Boston and I arrived before the game. And I walked into the hotel lobby, and the team was sitting in the lobby. And I thought this was so odd. My dad was sitting by himself. Uh, and I went up and I sat next to him and I was like, what's up, Dad? And he was like, whatever we were saying. And there was a piano player in the lobby and he was playing like some kind of like, I don't know, sad melody or
Oh, of
whatever.
course.
And my dad was looking out the window and I was kind of like, Dad? And he turned around and his eyes were glassy. And I was like, Dad, what the hell is going on? I had never seen my father like that. My dad was a powerhouse, right? Like, really, like, and he said to me, I worked my whole life for this team, and they're out to destroy me and my reputation. And I didn't ask any questions. I knew he meant the press. Like, he didn't mean the players.
Of course.
Um, so yeah, it was a very ugly time. And after the World Cup was over, he didn't go back. He didn't go back with the team. He stayed.
Oh wow. I
Yeah,
didn't know that either.
yeah. And
Was
his
his
contract, he returned like I think 2 weeks later and held a press conference. Um, but then his contract was over after the World Cup anyhow, and that was it.
was his relationship, I guess this will be my last question regarding this World Cup phase. Was his relationship with like the we'll say the executives of the federation good, or was it just like was it his decision like not to pursue maybe like a renewal of the contract? Did he have a good relationship with them, or was it just kind of like at that point because of what was going on in the press? And I guess maybe what happened at the finals behind closed doors, we'll say, did this it was just, separate kind of both parties. Like did the federation want him back, or did they use the opportunity and just say no?
I honestly don't know, but I think so many things happened that probably neither one of them wanted to work with each other anymore.
Right.
Not like anything bad, not like meaning like they parted in bad terms or it was a
Got it.
fight or it was an animosity thing, but a lot of things happened. My dad exploded on a couple people a couple times too. Um,
Press or federation people?
Federation people. Um, and the press, I know in that press conference, he quote unquote banned some people or removed some people, but I don't know if it was like how hot headed it was or whatever.
Right.
Um, but there were so many things, like, there were things, I'll go into the details too. There were so many things about my dad having affairs, like there would be like, there was a
I didn't
secretary.
know that at all.
Yeah, it was a secretary at the Federation that traveled with the team. So it was like, oh, like there was all this like, stuff in the Greek press about how my dad's having an affair. And I'd be like, oh my God. Like, because I knew the girl, right? It was like she traveled with the team. Um, there were all these like things about, well, how many tickets did the Federation get? And how come, so many people were left without tickets? Oh, someone must be taking those tickets and selling them in the black market. It must be the coach and all the executives and all that.
It's like the
So,
typical Greek.
yeah. And it was like, if it was that isolated thing, I think it, because we were all used to like those kind of stupid comments and stuff. But I think it was because it was the whole package. It just
Yeah,
really wore my dad out.
of course. I didn't know about half of those details, but it sounds like Greek press hasn't changed in like 30 years. So, sounds like they still kind of push a lot of false narratives all the time, especially
Yeah,
regarding
I mean,
sports.
it happens here now too.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Not to
100%.
digress on a different conversation, but one thing I will tell you, um, from the time I moved here from Greece,
Hmm.
like when I moved here as a teenager, the two countries were so apart on everything. And I'm watching it just kind of like Europe and the US are just, you can't tell them apart anymore. It's all the good things and all the bad things are the same everywhere.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. And you and you have plenty of insight into on that too. So that's I'm still reeling from some of the stories that you gave because I didn't know any of that. Um, Despina, I've had you here over an hour. I'm sorry if I'm taking up a lot of your
I
time
didn't even
here.
realize it was an hour.
I just now I'm looking at the recording time. I couldn't believe it. If I do just have one question, if you still have the time for it. If not,
Of
don't worry
course.
about it.
Yeah.
Um, I really wanted your insight about, especially with your connection to Olympiacos. You love Olympiacos, and you talked about kind of in the house you were the Olympiacos fan. Um, how did that connection come about? You and Olympiacos, like,
Me
what
personally,
attracted you to Olympiacos?
me personally,
You personally, yes, you.
oh, it's totally silly because I was a little kid. I mean, I think when I picked my team, I was 8 or 9 years old, and I was a little girl, and girls didn't play soccer at the time.
Mhm.
Though I did, I played with the boys, I honestly don't know what it was that attracted me as a little girl. Maybe it was the red. I don't know. But I was totally into the team. And then um, there were a lot of Olympiacos players on the national team.
Ah,
And
okay.
like I said, when I grew up with 22 brothers.
Right.
The Olympiacos guys were the ones that would take me to the movies when we were like hunkered down in anticipation of a game because you know that I have to stay at a hotel for a couple days before or whatever. So I built closer relationships with Olympiacos players when I was a little kid, and that's kind of
So
how it
that's what
came
kept
about.
you to,
Yes.
Olympiacos. Okay.
And then,
That's
of course, it got solidified after my dad
yeah, of
became the
course.
coach. It was like, to me, it's family. Olympiacos is family.
That's fantastic. Um, Despina, thank you so much for your time.
Of
I really
course.
do appreciate it. You talked a lot
I hope it
about.
was interesting.
Oh, it definitely was. I can tell you that much. I mean, there was so much that you gave us, so much information that really also kind of talked about the man, right? That was the legend that is the coach, your father, the legend of Panagoulias. And I never me like because I didn't get to witness a lot of that. I was born in
Hmm.
'89, so I
Yeah.
was so young during when he did the World Cup, and my appreciation for it came, almost 19 years later in life. So getting that, you always read about what happened, and you even in the
Yeah.
books about the 2004 Euro Cup victory, they reference things that happened at the World Cup, but they never talk about the individual. You never hear about that. So there was so much value in everything that you talked about, letting us kind of get to know the person himself. And also your experiences growing up in that. That's
Yeah.
also an incredible thing to listen to and hear about as well, because there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that everyone doesn't care about when they just look at the results. So thank you very much for that. And for the listeners that will be listening to this, do you have anything, any projects that people may want to follow that you're, whether it's Olympiacos related or otherwise? Do you have social media that they can follow? Um, Let them know.
Uh, no, at the moment, I don't have anything going on. I was involved with Olympiacos DC um, for a while, not so much actively anymore because of some personal reasons. But if anybody wants to connect, you can find me on Facebook or Instagram.
Absolutely. What's your handle so that they can find you?
Despina Panagoulias.
Fantastic. Despina, thank you so much. This was a
Thank you,
fantastic
Addie.
interview.
Take
Guys,
care.
this is Gate 7 International by the fans for the fans. More content coming as always. We got more stuff coming up in the next couple weeks. A lot of fun pre-match. And then of course, don't forget Sunday we have box. So thank you everyone, and we'll see you next time.